The storm hit Silverpine like a fist, hard, sudden, and merciless. Wind slashed sideways through the narrow streets of the sleeping town, tearing leaves from trees and hurling debris across empty sidewalks. Rain fell in thick sheets, pounding against rooftops, flooding gutters, swallowing the world in gray. Most stayed inside, tucked safely beneath warm blankets, unaware of the soul walking alone outside, soaked and forgotten. Shadow had no home. His name, Shadow, wasn't even his yet. It would be given to him later, long after he proved he was worth remembering. For now, he was just another nameless stray in the storm. Once, long ago, he might have had one. A backyard, a name someone whispered kindly. But now, the only thing that followed him was pain, sharp and raw where a deep wound cut across his side. He'd been attacked days earlier by something wild, maybe a coyote, maybe another starving stray. He'd survived, barely, and hunger gnawed at him constantly. His ribs jutted through his rain-drenched fur, every step was heavy. He limped past shuttered shops and darkened porches, his eyes low, searching, always searching, for food, for warmth, for something that resembled safety. But no one saw him, no one wanted to. People had turned their faces long ago, convinced that he was nothing more than a filthy stray, a creature too broken to be worth a glance. Still, Shadow moved on. The storm raged, but he kept walking. Somewhere deep in his chest, something stronger than instinct pushed him forward, a sense that even in a world that had forgotten him, something still mattered. Something still needed him. And in the distance, almost too faint to hear above the wind, a sound stirred the storm inside him. A cry. Not a dog, not a cat, a baby. And suddenly, Shadow stopped walking. He listened again. The cry came once more. Fragile, small, lost. And just like that, he turned and ran into the night. The wind howled as Shadow ran. His body protested every movement. His side ached with every leap. His paws slipped against the rain-slick sidewalks. But the sound had stirred something deep inside him. He'd heard many things in his time on the streets. Sirens, barking, angry voices. But this cry was different. It was soft, rhythmic, full of panic and confusion, as if the world had just begun for whoever made it, and already it hurt. The closer he got, the clearer it became. A baby, alone, crying in the storm. Shadow's ears twitched. He paused, sniffing the air, trying to locate the source. And then he saw it, barely visible beneath the flickering glow of a dying street lamp. Just outside the gate of an empty park, a small plastic basket sat still on the sidewalk. It was carefully placed, but completely exposed to the elements. Rain pelted its surface. Water pooled around its edges. Shadow crept closer. Inside the basket, nestled in a thin towel, was a baby girl, no more than a few days old. Her tiny face was pale, her lips tinged with blue. She trembled, barely able to cry now. Her fists, clenched tight, twitched against the cold. Shadow didn't think. He didn't weigh the odds or fear the pain. He simply acted. With the gentlest grip his teeth could manage, he latched onto the edge of the basket's handle. It shifted, unsteady in his jaws, but he didn't let go. Step by slow step, Shadow pulled the basket away from the open sidewalk, away from the storm, toward the road, toward light, toward hope. Behind him, the storm roared on. But ahead, there was something that mattered. And so, he carried her forward, because something deep within him knew this little life wasn't meant to end here. He was hurt. He was starving. Every muscle screamed for rest. And yet, when faced with a choice, to lie down and let the storm take him, or to keep going for her, Shadow chose her. Not because he was strong, but because something inside him refused to let this tiny life end alone. Even with nothing left to give, he gave everything he had. The road was empty, carved like a ribbon through the storm. No headlights in sight, only the sound of rain hitting pavement and the distant groan of thunder rolling across the hills. Shadow's legs trembled with every step. The basket bumped against his chest as he pulled it, his paws slipping in the mud, his breaths shallow and raspy. Still, he moved. A street corner appeared up ahead, an old bus stop with a rusted roof, barely shielding the bench beneath it. Shadow dragged the basket toward it, pushing past the ache in his ribs, past the chill in his bones. When he reached it, he nudged the basket gently beneath the shelter, just far enough so the rain couldn't reach the baby. Then he waited. He stood guard beside her, eyes watching the horizon. Every time a pair of headlights pierced through the dark, he barked. Loud, sharp, desperate, his voice cracked, hoarse from cold and exhaustion. But he didn't stop. Cars passed. Some slowed. None stopped. To them, he was just another stray, just a barking dog in the rain. No one saw the trembling infant beneath the bench. No one saw the broken hero beside her. When Shadow's voice gave out, he whimpered. And when even that became too much, he curled his body tightly around the basket. Rainwater dripped from his fur. His body shook violently from the cold, but he didn't flinch. He didn't move. He pressed his thin frame against the side of the basket, blocking the wind, trapping what little warmth he had left. He laid his head across the handle and kept watch, eyes wide, ears twitching at every sound. He was no longer just a dog. He was her shelter, her warmth, her chance. And in the storm's darkest hours, Shadow stayed, because no one else did. Dawn hadn't yet broken when Evelyn turned onto Maple Avenue. The storm had calmed, but left behind a cold, heavy stillness. The kind that clung to your skin and made silence feel loud. Evelyn tightened the scarf around her neck, her hospital badge still clipped to her chest. She had just finished her third straight night shift at the county hospital, exhaustion dragging at her limbs. Her steps slowed as she approached the old bus stop. Something didn't feel right. At first, it looked like a pile of blankets or maybe trash left behind, but as she got closer, the shape became clear. A dog. Soaked, unmoving, curled tightly around a plastic basket beneath the bus shelter. Her heart skipped. Evelyn crouched cautiously, setting down her bag. The dog didn't growl or flinch. Instead, he slowly raised his head and looked at her. Eyes clouded but alert, filled with something between fear and pleading. She reached out slowly, whispering, "It's okay, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." Then she heard it. Sound. Faint. Weak. A whimper. Not from the dog, but from the basket. Evelyn's breath caught. Her hands moved without thinking. She leaned in, gently pulling back the towel. What she saw made her chest tighten and her eyes sting. A newborn baby. Pale, ice cold, her lips blue, her breath shallow, yet alive. "Oh my God," Evelyn whispered, grabbing her phone with shaking fingers. 911. "Yes, it's urgent. I found a baby and a dog. I think he kept her alive." Within minutes, the wail of sirens cut through the morning fog. Paramedics rushed to the scene, lifting the infant with urgent precision, wrapping her in warm blankets. One EMT knelt beside the dog, gently stroking his soaked fur. "He stayed with her all night?" he asked, incredulous. Evelyn nodded, unable to speak. The dog, still weak, still shivering, let his head fall back down, finally letting go. But even in surrender, he was still beside her. At the hospital, the baby was rushed into neonatal intensive care. Doctors worked quickly, inserting IVs, wrapping her in layers of warmth. Her temperature was dangerously low, her lungs struggling under the weight of cold and exposure. If she'd been found an hour later, one doctor muttered, she wouldn't have made it. They named her Emily. No last name, no birth certificate, no family to call, just a new name for a life nearly lost, and a second chance no one expected. In another wing of the hospital, Shadow lay quietly in the care of a veterinary volunteer. He was sedated while his side was stitched up and his blood tested. The vet noted signs of long-term malnutrition and infection. Scars, too, evidence of fights he'd never asked for. and pain he'd endured in silence. Despite the tubes and needles, Shadow remained still. He only stirred when someone walked past his door, ears perking slightly, eyes searching for something or someone. Days passed. Emily grew stronger. Her cheeks turned from blue to pink. She cried louder now, drank formula, grasped fingers with tiny hands. Nurses smiled when they spoke her name. Shadow healed slower, but he healed. His appetite returned, his coat was trimmed, cleaned, and brushed to a shine. He began to sit up, cautiously, each movement deliberate. The hospital couldn't keep them forever, and so when Emily was stable enough to leave the ICU, she was transferred to a nearby children's shelter, one that took in abandoned infants. The nurses sent a message ahead: she's not coming alone. They called him Shadow softly at first, unsure if the name would stick. But it did. For the first time in his life, he had a name. And somehow, it fit. Shadow came too. They placed his bed in the nursery corner, not far from Emily's crib. That night, as the staff dimmed the lights, they noticed something remarkable. Every time Emily stirred or whimpered, Shadow lifted his head. And when she slept soundly, so did he. Side by side, in a quiet corner of the world, two forgotten souls began to heal. Together. At first it was just a local headline: "Stray dog saves abandoned baby during storm." A few grainy photos, taken by paramedics, of the plastic basket, of the dog curled beside the newborn, of the nurse crouched in the rain, were shared on the town paper's website. But something about the story refused to stay small. Within hours it spread. Larger outlets picked it up. News anchors told it with teary eyes. "A nameless dog protects a nameless child," one said. "An instinct stronger than fear." Online the story exploded. Thousands of people shared it, commented, wept. They called him a hero, a guardian, a miracle. People sent gifts to the shelter: blankets, formula, donations. Someone mailed a tiny collar embroidered with Shadow in gold thread. Others sent letters. Some just wrote "thank you." But somewhere far from the headlines, in a one-bedroom apartment on the other side of the county, one woman read it differently. Clara. She read every line with shaking hands, heart racing, eyes blurring. The baby in the story, the one in the basket near the park. She knew that baby. She had placed her there. Clara had been drowning, a single mother, her husband killed in a car accident while she was 6 months pregnant, crushed by grief. No family left, no income, no plan. The night she gave birth, the weight of it all collapsed in on her. She made the worst decision of her life, one she hadn't stopped regretting since. But then she saw that photo of the dog curled around the basket, soaked and shivering, refusing to walk away. A dog had done what she couldn't. And in that moment, Clara didn't cry. She stood. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat at her small kitchen table, the article still glowing on her phone screen. Shadow, Emily, the storm, the basket. It played in her mind on loop. What could have happened, what almost did. Her daughter had nearly died, but she hadn't. Because of a dog. Not a trained rescue dog, not a pet with a home. Just a stray, starving, injured, alone. And still he chose to stay. He chose to protect. He chose her. And Clara had walked away. The shame was unbearable, but beneath it something stirred, stronger than guilt, older than fear. It was love, the kind that doesn't need perfection, the kind that returns even when it's broken. Clara remembered holding Emily for the first time, the way her tiny chest rose and fell, the sound of her first cry. That love had never disappeared. It had just been buried under sorrow too heavy to carry. Now it rose again. Clara called the shelter the next morning. She asked about the baby. The woman on the line hesitated, but said the child was recovering well. Clara's voice cracked. "She's my daughter," she whispered. "I want to make things right and bring her home if she'll let me." But a phone call wasn't enough. The shelter staff explained gently. There were procedures, paperwork, and legal steps. Emily was now under state protection. Clara would need to meet with a social worker, provide identification, undergo interviews, and most of all, prove she was stable, ready, and willing to care for her daughter. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be quick. But Clara didn't flinch. "Whatever it takes," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do everything." There was silence. Then the woman asked, "And the dog?" Clara didn't even hesitate. "Him too. He saved her. He's family." That afternoon, Clara arrived at the shelter with trembling hands and a heart full of fear and hope. She didn't come for forgiveness. She came for redemption, and for the chance to become the mother she had once failed to be. Not just from her daughter, but from the dog who had loved her when Clara didn't. It took weeks. Clara met with caseworkers, therapists, legal officers. She sat through long interviews, submitted documents, opened up about grief she'd kept buried for years. She didn't hide her mistakes. She didn't beg. She simply spoke with honesty and with a quiet kind of strength that only comes from true remorse. And slowly, trust began to rebuild. When the final approval came, Clara held the letter in her trembling hands. It was official. She was granted temporary custody of Emily, with a clear path toward full adoption. The first night she brought Emily home was quiet, almost sacred. Clara had cleaned every inch of her apartment. She borrowed a crib from a neighbor, folded fresh baby clothes into drawers, set out formula and soft blankets. Shadow arrived with them. Still cautious, still limping slightly, but stronger now. His bed was placed near Emily's crib, exactly where it had always belonged. Emily fussed at first, unfamiliar with the new setting. Then Shadow padded over, lay beside the crib, and rested his chin on the rail. Emily stilled, and just like that, peace settled in. From that night forward, they were never apart. Clara watched in awe as the bond between her daughter and the dog deepened, two beings who had once been abandoned, now inseparable. During school breaks and holidays, Clara volunteered at the children's shelter, not out of guilt, but gratitude. She folded clothes, read books to toddlers, washed bottles. She never said much, but the way she worked, with quiet dedication, spoke volumes. She knew she could never erase the past, but she could honor it. She could build something new. A family, not perfect but whole. A mother, a daughter, and a dog named Shadow who had once been forgotten but now would never be alone again. Years passed gently, like the breeze through spring trees. Emily turned 5. She loved storybooks, soft music, and peanut butter sandwiches. She had Clara's quiet strength and Shadow's watchful eyes. She laughed often, loudly, without apology. And wherever she went, Shadow followed, his step slower now, his face graying, but his presence as steady as ever. Their backyard became their world, a small patch of grass beneath an old oak tree, where butterflies danced and shadows stretched long in the afternoon sun. Emily would lie on her belly with a picture book, one hand gently resting on Shadow's back, the other flipping pages. "You still love stories, huh?" she'd whisper. And he would huff softly, eyes half closed, as if saying, "Always." Clara often watched from the porch, her heart full and quiet. Sometimes she joined them, other times she just watched, grateful. She and Shadow volunteered at the shelter every month, not just to help others, but to remind themselves of where they had come from, of who they had once been, of how second chances looked when they come with fur and tiny fingers. One spring afternoon, as birds chirped in the trees and the wind smelled of earth and daisies, Emily fell asleep on the blanket beside Shadow. He didn't move, just closed his eyes, his head near hers, his breath calm. Clara sat beside them, her hand resting on both. There were no cameras, no headlines, no storm, just peace. A dog who had once been nameless had built a life defined by love. A mother who once walked away had found her way back. A child who was left in the rain now had a family. Not everyone sees the heroes among us, but sometimes they come on 4 legs, with wounds we don't understand and hearts that love us anyway. And in that quiet backyard, beneath the oak tree, the legacy of Shadow lived on. Not in fame, but in the safety he gave, the love he never withheld, and the little girl who would never again wonder if she was wanted. High in the northern Vermont peaks, where snow whispered across rooftops and silence settled deeper than sleep, there stood a village where time moved slower, and every flake seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. In that village, where pine trees bowed low under the weight of silence, homes were not owned but assigned, granted by the mountain rescue firm to employees as part of their service. Sarah and her family had lived in one of those company cabins while her husband worked the slopes. But when he died in the line of duty, the policy was clear. The family had 100 days before the home would be reclaimed. No exceptions were made, not for grieving widows, not for infants, not for anyone. It didn't matter how many children she had or where she might go, rules were rules. Compassion held no place in the fine print. Sarah Whitlow stood at her frost-laced window, breath fogging the cracked glass. She was 32, once a seamstress, now a widow. Her husband, Thomas, a mountain engineer, had died 3 months earlier during a rescue operation gone wrong. He'd been trying to repair a collapsed bridge during a blizzard. They found his body frozen near the ravine, his final act shielding 2 trapped hikers. Now Sarah lived in that same house with their 3 children, Emma, 10 years old with quiet eyes, and the newborn twins, Anna and Noah, just 4 months old. Since the funeral, the village had gone cold. Neighbors stopped speaking. The company sent one letter, then another, and finally an eviction notice. Vacate the premises by day 100. On the final morning, beneath a sky heavy with snow, the sun hadn't yet risen when Sarah finished packing what little they had left. The cabin still smelled faintly of pine and ash, of a man who once came home laughing through the snow. She paused by the fireplace where Thomas used to warm his hands and whispered, "I'm sorry, love. I can't stay where you died." Emma stirred in the corner, hair tangled, cheeks pink with sleep. "Are we going far, Mama?" she asked, voice hushed like a secret. Sarah knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Far enough," she said gently. "But we'll be together. That's what matters." She strapped Anna and Noah into the woolen sling across her chest, each still swaddled tight, noses red from the cold. Their breath came in soft puffs. She wrapped an extra shawl around Emma and tucked her sketch pad into a cloth bag, the only toy she insisted on carrying. The wind howled as Sarah opened the front door. Snow blew sideways, sharp and white. For a moment she turned back, eyes sweeping the home she had sewn curtains for, where Thomas had painted the nursery yellow. Everything felt like it was still breathing, but not alive. She stepped out. Behind them, the last footprints they would ever leave on that land quickly vanished in the falling snow. No one from the village came to see them off. No goodbye, no blessing, just silence. Sarah's boots crunched as they moved into the forest edge. The map in her coat pocket led only to rumors. Another village beyond the ridge, a day's walk if the weather held. But winter never kept promises. He didn't look back again. Her past had already shut the door. By midday, the snow deepened and the forest thickened. Every tree looked the same, branches hunched beneath weight, trunks veiled in frost. Sarah moved steadily, though her legs ached and her boots had started to leak at the seams. Emma trudged beside her, one mitten missing, fingers curled into her coat sleeve. They hadn't seen another soul in hours. Just wind, just white, just the babies, dozing lightly in the sling against Sarah's chest, their warmth the only thing keeping her grounded. By late afternoon, the map became useless. The trail disappeared beneath fresh snow, and every direction looked like nowhere. Hunger gnawed at Sarah's stomach, but she ignored it until she heard Emma's belly rumble. Emma clutched her side and whispered, "Mama, I'm hungry." Sarah stopped, kneeling into the snow. Her breath came hard. The twins had started to stir, their soft whimpers like tiny ghosts. The wind was howling now, scraping through the trees like claws. The light was dying fast. "There's a tree up ahead," she said. "We'll rest there." It was a crooked pine, bent low from years of snow and time. Sarah tucked a thin blanket beneath it, helped Emma sit with the twins in her lap. "I'll be back soon," Sarah whispered, brushing snow from Emma's lashes. "Just stay right here. Hold them tight." Emma nodded, lips trembling, arms wrapping her infant siblings as if they might melt away. Sarah walked off into the woods with nothing but her coat, a small cloth bag, and hope that maybe berries or bark or anything would answer their need. Minutes passed, then more. Then the sky turned to iron. Emma sat still beneath the crooked tree, the twins bundled against her chest. The wind stung her face. The cold pressed in. "Mama," she whispered, but no one answered. So she did the only thing a 10-year-old could do. She cried, holding her siblings close, her tears falling silently into snow that didn't care. Night had settled like a blanket of ink over the valley. The stars, hidden behind storm clouds, offered no light. Snow fell in thick, soundless sheets, and wind coiled through the trees like something alive. In the back of David and Emily Carter's pickup truck, Max stood still as stone. The old German Shepherd, once a military rescue dog, had long since learned to listen beyond the obvious. Tonight, something pulled at him. A noise. At first, it was faint, almost imagined, but then clearer. A child's cry, thin and fractured. Max barked, once, sharp, urgent. Emily turned around in the cab. "What is it, boy?" Another bark, louder this time. Then Max leapt from the truck, paws slicing into fresh snow, his body a blur of motion. David hit the brakes. "Emily, stay here," he called, throwing the truck into park and grabbing his flashlight. The beam barely pierced the thick flurries, but Max was already gone, vanishing into the dark like he knew exactly where he was going. Emily climbed into the back seat, heart racing. She wrapped a blanket around herself and reached for the emergency bag. Something about Max's bark had unsettled her. She wasn't wrong. Max ran fast, cutting through the cold with instinct guiding every step. Through the trees, past frozen brush. Then he stopped, ears forward, breath steaming. There, under a crooked pine, a small girl, barely 10, sat curled around two crying infants, their faces red and wet with cold. She shivered violently, holding them close, rocking slightly. Max approached, slow but sure. Emma looked up, startled, but she didn't scream. Somehow she knew he meant no harm. Max stood still, staring, then barked once toward the woods behind him. The signal was clear. Help is needed, now. David stumbled through knee-deep snow, flashlight bouncing between trees as he followed Max's trail. The wind clawed at his coat, and the darkness pressed in, thick and absolute. But he heard the bark, one more echo from ahead, and quickened his pace. Then he saw them. Under the bent pine, 3 small figures huddled close. Emma lifted her head, wide-eyed, cheeks flushed with cold and streaked with tears. The 2 babies in her arms whimpered softly, their cries thin and fading. David dropped to his knees beside them. "Oh God," he murmured. He shrugged off his thick coat without hesitation, wrapping it around the twins. His fingers trembled as he tucked the fabric around their tiny bodies, shielding them from the wind. "You're safe now," he said gently, eyes locking with Emma's. Emma clutched her siblings tighter. "I'm waiting for my mom," she whispered. David nodded, "And we'll wait." "But we can't stay out here long, sweetheart. It's too cold." Max turned, already running back toward the truck. David looked up. "He's going to bring help. You trust dogs?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. Max returned minutes later, bounding through snow beside Emily, who carried extra blankets and a thermal pack. Her breath caught when she saw the children. "Oh, my Lord." She dropped to her knees, immediately swaddling Anna and Noah, checking their fingers and lips. Emma leaned into David's side, too exhausted to cry. Then, footsteps. Sarah burst through the trees, a cloth bag slung across her chest, cheeks cut raw from wind. Her eyes locked on the scene and widened in horror. "Emma?" Emma looked up, and for the first time all night, her voice didn't tremble. "Mama?" They found us. Sarah collapsed to her knees, scooping her babies into her arms, tears hot against the cold. Emily placed a hand on her shoulder. Come home with us, it's warm and safe. And for the first time in days, Sarah nodded without fear. The Carter cabin glowed like a lantern in the snow, nestled in a pocket of trees where wind softened and silence felt safe. As soon as they stepped through the door, warmth wrapped around Sarah like a blanket she hadn't felt in months. Emily ushered her to the hearth, where a fire crackled steadily. Sit down, dear. Let's warm those babies. She handed Sarah a thick towel as David gently placed the twins on a fur-lined rug. Emily moved with swift tenderness. She warmed milk on the stove, dipped her finger to test it, then bottle-fed the infants who suckled like they hadn't tasted comfort in days. Emma sat close by, hunched over a steaming bowl of soup. Her lips trembled around the first spoonful, but she didn't stop. Sarah knelt beside her, hands trembling as she fed herself in slow bites. It had been days since she'd eaten anything hot. I don't know how to thank you, Sarah whispered. Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Noah's forehead. You don't have to. No mother should have to face the cold alone. Later, with full bellies and blankets wrapped tight, Anna and Noah slept soundly near the fire. Emma curled beside them, eyes already drooping. Sarah sat against the couch, one arm around Emma's back, the other cradling Anna's leg as if afraid she might float away. David and Emily exchanged a glance across the room. It was the kind of look only two people who had known both deep loss and deep grace could share. The house fell into a gentle hush. Outside, snow continued to fall, but now it felt quieter somehow, as though it too knew someone had made it through the worst of the night. Inside that modest cabin, for the first time in a long while, Sarah closed her eyes and slept. Not out of exhaustion, but out of safety. The next morning, the sun spilled through frosted windows, casting soft gold over the floorboards. It was the first morning in weeks that Sarah hadn't woken to the sound of crying or wind clawing at the shutters. Instead, there was quiet, the kind that didn't feel empty. Emily had been up early. She'd already laundered a stack of baby clothes and prepared warm wash basins. With gentle hands, she bathed Anna and Noah, wrapped them in fresh blankets, and handed Sarah a jar of salve for her cracked feet. Stay as long as you like, she said softly. Sarah paused, overwhelmed. You've done more than I can ever repay. David looked up from where he was carving kindling. Then don't think of it as a debt, he said. Think of it as a beginning. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. She gathered her children close and nodded, her voice low but steady. I promise, I'll earn our place here. That afternoon, while Emily was sorting fabric, Sarah noticed an old sewing machine in the corner, dusty but intact. Her fingers brushed over it with reverence. I used to sew, she said, before everything. Then start again, Emily smiled. You'll find your hands remember. And they did. With David's help, Sarah set up a small workspace in the sunroom. Emily offered scraps from her quilting chest. By evening, Sarah had repaired 2 old jackets and stitched a baby bonnet from leftover wool. A part of her spirit, long frozen, began to thaw. Days passed, and the Carter home transformed, not with new walls or furniture, but with sound, laughter, tiny footsteps, the kind of joyful noise a house forgets how to make after too much silence. Anna and Noah, now well-fed and warm, began to coo more, kick their feet in the cradle, and fall asleep easily to the sound of crackling fire. Emma, with rosy cheeks and a sweater 2 sizes too big, followed Max around the yard like his shadow. He didn't seem to mind. In fact, Max grew especially protective of the twins, often curling beside their crib, one ear always perked. Sarah's sewing took off quickly. At first, Emily brought her creations into town, hand-stitched scarves, infant caps, repurposed coats. People noticed the quality. Then came requests. Then orders. By the end of the second week, neighbors began showing up at the Carter cabin, not just for clothes, but to meet the woman behind the needle. Some brought soup, others brought fabric, A few came just to hold a baby and sit by the fire. Sarah worked during the day and rocked the twins by night. Emma helped where she could, folding cloth, sweeping corners, whispering secrets into Max's ear. David and Emily watched it all unfold from their chairs by the hearth, fingers laced, smiles quiet but full. It had been so long since their house had been filled with warmth, not just from the fire, but from life. One evening, as snow dusted the windows again, David leaned toward Emily and whispered, "I think this was what Ethan wanted." And Emily, tears welling but never falling, nodded. "So do I." Years passed like chapters, quiet but constant. Emma grew tall, steady, and full of thought. While other children played in the snow without care, she often sat by the fire reading, eyes fixed not just on the page, but on something far ahead. She never forgot, not the blizzard, not the pine tree, not the way her mother clutched Anna and Noah like the world might take them at any moment. In her heart, Emma carried a quiet fire. She poured it into words, page after page, turning memory into story, grief into meaning. Her notebooks filled quickly. Every sentence stitched together the past she could never fully speak aloud. At university, she studied literature. Professors took notice of her writing. One day, an editor came across her manuscript and asked if she'd be willing to share it more widely. Months later, her story aired on national television. The program featured her voice reading aloud over images of snowy forests, crackling fires, and old cabins. Her story wasn't just about hardship. It was about the people who saved her. "We were once told our family had no place," she said in the broadcast. "But kindness found us anyway." She paused. There was a couple, David and Emily Carter, who opened their home to a mother and her 3 starving children in the middle of a storm. They had lost their only son, and still, they gave everything they had. Warmth, safety, dignity. They didn't save us out of duty. They saved us out of love. And today I carry their kindness as proof that good people still exist, quietly, humbly, and exactly when we need them most. That night, David, Emily, and Sarah sat around the fireplace, tears in their eyes as they watched the broadcast on a grainy TV screen. Max lay by the hearth, tail thumping once as if he understood. "She did it," Sarah whispered. David nodded, voice rough with pride. "She turned pain into something beautiful." The wooden gate creaked open as Emma stepped onto the snowy path. It had been years, but the scent of pine and wood smoke brought everything back in a single breath. The cabin stood unchanged, soft light spilling from its windows like warmth in solid form. David was first to greet her at the door, arms wide. "There's my girl," he said, voice thick with emotion. Emily appeared behind him, apron still dusted with flour. Max gave a gentle bark, then pressed his gray muzzle against Emma's palm. Inside, the table was already full. Roasted chicken, herb-stuffed rolls, root vegetables glistening with honey glaze. Anna and Noah raced to set more places. Sarah reached across to smooth Emma's coat, eyes glistening. Laughter came easily, like music returning to a familiar tune. Stories overlapped, jokes flew, and every so often someone had to pause, not for breath, but to smile at how full the room felt. Emma caught David watching it all, quietly, gratefully, like a man who had waited a long time for the sound of family to return. And as forks clinked, chairs scraped, and laughter rang louder than the wind outside, it was clear this was more than a visit. This was joy, finally come home.